Good morning. My name is Ted Brady. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. I want to welcome you to part two of municipal efforts to address diversity, equity, and inclusion. This next hour and a half is meant to be very interactive. We're actually looking to get as much from you as you're trying to get from us today to help us inform the kind of equity work we do, but also to understand where we are as a community, as our membership going forward. I'd like to start by welcoming those of you who joined us for the first session this morning. Thanks for coming back. I hope you enjoyed your cup of coffee and got a little work done. Also, a quick acknowledgement that Town Fair would be impossible without our sponsors. So I want to thank Efficiency Vermont. I also want to thank NEMRC. I want to thank People's United and Vermont Blue Advantage for their support from Blue Cross Blue Shield. Without their support, this would not be such a deal. 20 trainings for $68. And our membership dues would have to go up. So thank you to our sponsors. A couple of quick housekeeping rules. For the next hour and 15 minutes, we're asking you to respond to today's panelists, to our facilitators. To do that, we're asking you to use the Zoom chat. This is a little different than earlier. We're using the feed loop chat. We're going to be communicating with you directly in Zoom. If you want to say something, if you want to answer a question that's been asked, just either raise your hand and we'll call on you. Please don't speak until you're called on, and say it verbally over the video, or you can enter it into the chat, and the chat will come directly to the panelists, not to everybody, for the first hour and 15 minutes of this effort. Also, just a reminder that please keep yourself on mute unless you're speaking. We don't want to have to do the mute all fun. And I want to thank Lisa Goodell and Claire Millette for their support today from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. I'm going to introduce our two facilitators and give a little background. About 10 months ago, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns Board adopted a social equity plan and a declaration on inclusion and equity. That led to the creation of the VLCT Equity Committee. The Vermont Community Foundation gave VLCT a $50,000 grant to undertake this equity work. And with that funding, we've pulled together an equity committee and started to do this work to build a toolkit for our members, to the smallest to the largest, to deal with equity, to help them deal with the complex issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion work. We've used a portion of that to hire a consultant, an expert in equity work, because we are the experts in municipal work, but we are not the experts in equity work. And so we brought on two incredible experts, one being Nikki Fuller. Nikki owns Workplace Matters and is our prime contractor on this effort. She is currently the Chief Diversity Officer at Colby Sawyer College. She is an attorney. She worked with the Burlington School District as the Director of Diversity, and she was for many years in the City of Burlington, the City Attorney's Office. We're really lucky that she's joined us. In partnership with Nikki, Dr. Wanda Hedding-Grant, currently the Vice Provost of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and the Chief Diversity Officer at Carnegie Mellon University, joins us. Wanda, many of us know Wanda because she's been doing great work in Burlington since she was a college kid at UVM a few years ago. But we know her best as the VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at UVM, and as a professor at UVM. And she's done so many incredible things for this community and for Burlington and for the university over her time there. We miss her dearly as she's gone to Pennsylvania, but we're really lucky that she's still working with the league. I'm going to be your driver and your facilitator, but they're going to be the facilitator of the main conversation. Folks, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you very much. It's nice to see the faces I can see, and it's nice to say hello to those who I'm definitely seeing your names. And as Ted mentioned, I am Wanda Hedding-Grant. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and it is my pleasure to be here. And I will make one small correction. I'm here in Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh, but my family, my children and my husband are right there in Colchester, Vermont. So I have not given up my Vermont residency. I have a little bit in my head that that's where I will retire at. And so it's meant so much to me. So I still have my stake in the ground there after 37 years right there in the Vermont area, in Vermont, the state of Vermont. So I wanted to say that, and it is my pleasure to be here with you. Nikki?
Well, I will give my greetings as well. Greetings to everyone. Of course, again, we can't see everyone's faces, but I see some very familiar faces. I want to give a shout out to Abundant Sun there, and the Burlington folks who I worked with for many years and continue to work with. So I'm so excited to be here. And this is going to be great work that VLCT is doing. And I think it's going to change the DEI landscape in the state of Vermont. So we're looking forward to it.
So,
Hi, Ted.
For temporary. Oh, I know what I did.
someone's unmuted. We're expecting that. So at this point, slides up. And next slide, Ted. Wonderful. So as Ted already indicated, this is a listening session. So what I will say is that our jobs here is to mostly listen. We don't have all the answers and don't expect that you will have all the answers, but what we want to do is be able to hear your perspectives, to center your voices around what's happening in your towns, your cities, your communities, what's on your mind, and particularly as it relates to DE&I. And look at this as an opportunity, as it says there, to share your thoughts and observations and opinions. We want to engage in a solution-based dialogue or process where, you know, this work is very hard, and sometimes we can get very frustrated about different things that are going on. But part of the goal is to have it be on our journey that we're looking for best solutions and answers that fit us and the state of Vermont, and those in the state of Vermont and beyond. So come into this space and with the intent of how VLCT, how you can help VLCT help you all in your towns and cities around fostering DE&I and getting into that mindset, and how do we create sort of respect around this topic, these issues, in a way that it has positive outcomes. So it is a listening session. Nikki, anything you would add?
I would just add that yes, it's a listening session, and we're encouraging you not to just to listen to each other. That's the important piece. You might be surprised that you're having similar issues as other municipalities may be having, or you might find that someone makes a point that you hadn't thought of that might be helpful for your organization. So that's the important piece of this listening session, is that sometimes when we're talking, we don't hear those things. So the goal is for us to be listening, ears wide open. So I give it over to you, Wanda.
Okay, next slide, Ted. Yes. So guiding principles, go ahead, Nikki.
Okay. Our guiding principles are pretty simple, and many of us have seen them, you know, community promises and what have you. So they're really very short. As the facilitators, our promise to you, we agree that we will lead the session, okay? We will stay engaged with you, and as I just said, we will listen to you. We want to collect information so that in the end, based on what we hear, we can provide you with useful information. As participants, we ask that you stay engaged. I know sometimes on Zoom is hard because you can't see everyone, but we really encourage you to try to stay engaged. Prioritize listening. Again, it's a listening session. Speak your truth. Don't speak for anyone else. So you use I terms instead of we terms, and expect and accept non-closure. It's a listening session. And even if we had some answers, they wouldn't be the answers for everyone. So it's really important for us to keep in mind that the goal here is to hear and to learn and really to listen. And you should be able to accept that there will be non-closure. And I say it all the time, DEI is something we're going to have to do always. And so there will never be a complete closure. So just accept that you won't get the answers that you think you came to get today. But you will get some ideas and some support around DEI. Ted, next slide.
Thank you. So Ted gave a little bit of an outline, and as Nikki was finishing up, I mean, part of what we want to do is gather meaningful data, and part of that meaningful data is about your expectations, your hopes, and relationships that you have with VLCT as well within your municipalities. And I'm keep throwing out those words because I'm hoping that we're teeing you up around thinking about this. And so, you know, it won't be quite 90 minutes, but in the next sort of 50 minutes plus, you know, we will ask several questions. We'll ask you to raise your hand. And as it was already said, that we will enable the chat about the last 15 minutes. One, we wanted to have this be interactive, as well as not have just sort of a list of things coming up in the chat, and sometimes are they can be somewhat distracting, and we want to be able to engage. And also to know that as facilitators, we want to support this process. We want to support this process from the idea of creating brave spaces. And so, you know, we may redirect or ask other questions, or we may need clarity. So thank you again for coming along with us. And we're going to get started with the first set of questions. I hope everyone is ready. So Nikki, go for it.
All right. First question is, why is DEI important to your municipality as well as the state of Vermont? So that's our first question. I know we're going to hear something out there.
So if you'd like to answer that question, which we hope you do, please raise your hand using the Zoom raise your hand feature, and I will call on you. And give them a moment.
Yes, you know, I'm a trained social worker, and you know, silence. I'm used to silence, and when it, you know, so get your thoughts together. And I see a hand coming up. So
All right, thank you.
Yeah, Jamie Contois from Putney. Come on off mute.
Comptoir, but very close. Jamie Comptoir. To me, we've done some of this work in Putney already, and creating a community that is welcoming. And so hearing statistics and seeing police pullovers at disproportionate levels is something figuring out how to address.
thank you.
Thank you, Jamie Contois. I'll do my best. I apologize. Again,
Anyone
please just
else?
raise your hand. I see Ann Lawless from Wheelock. Come on off mute, Ann.
Thank you. DEI is important for me in my municipality, because we need to make sure that everyone is served well. And I guess, are we supposed to answer just the first question now?
Yeah, just the first question.
Okay. I guess I'm a little concerned that it's not as important it may not be as important to other people.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Jolene Mulvaney. Jolene, come on off mute if you can.
Hi, from Barry City. It's not only important for us to kind of address the redresses of the past, but also this is really about preparing our communities for the future. That's why it's important. It's important for both reasons, to examine our past and also to look into the future so that we can make the adjustments and changes in our laws, in our municipal, whatever's going on in our towns and our communities for the future, because it's a more diverse future coming, and we really need to be ready for it and prepare our communities to be welcoming.
Thank
Yes.
you. Jolene.
Sarah Lang from Brattleboro.
Hi, thanks. I don't work for a municipality, but one of the regional development corporations that do a lot of the talent recruitment for the area. And I think it's important for us to do DEI to challenge our perception that we're welcoming. I think we, as the state, really like to consider ourselves welcoming. I don't know if we walk the walk yet, though. And so I think it's just really important to challenge that view.
Thank you, Sarah.
We have John Bartlett next.
Yeah, good morning. I'm calling in from Milton, Vermont. I think DEI is important to our community as well as the state as a whole, and each county. One thing for Milton is continues to be a growing community, and it's a real mixture of people that have lived here for multiple generations, as well as a lot of new residents. And I think that it continues to be somewhat of a melting pot, if it's not too much of an old term. It's easy, at least in municipal offices, we only see who we see walking through the doors, and you have to respect the fact that the population and who you represent as a municipal employee is constantly changing. And we do want them to feel welcomed in the success of our community, whether they're working here or moving here to be residents and work outside of Milton. You have to respect that constant change and looking forward, like the other woman said, into the future and what it's going to mean for you. And I think the more we can be sort of in step with the state and be aware of what's going on in surrounding communities, it helps create that congruity that you want to see, so that it's not just say, well, come drive across our borders and feel welcome into Milton, but in general.
Thank you.
We have Cameron Niedermeyer from the city of Montpelier.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I sort of want to build on what Sarah said, because I thought that was a really important point, is really checking ourselves as organizations to understand that our BIPOC communities are telling us we're not doing a good job. And at least that's happening here. I can speak only for Montpelier, is really being told you're not doing a good job. We've gotten a survey that says people don't feel welcome. So we could feel like we're doing all that we can be doing, but clearly we're not. I think back to when I first moved up here from the South, which has its own problems, but has a far more engaged history of actually talking about DEI issues that's in people's vocabulary. And I haven't seen that up here. This isn't an issue here, right? The first meeting I came to with VLCT, Keisha Ram led us through an equity session, and half the room said, we don't have an equity problem here. And that was really eye-opening for me. And so I see that as a continued mindset here in Vermont. And people really don't believe that there's an issue here, which is really damning and hard to hear for a lot of our community members who face those issues every day. So I think it has to be important, because you're right, we're not serving our entire communities. So I just thank you to Sarah for bringing that up.
We have Ellen Kay from the city of Barrie.
Hello, everybody. Great to be here. Wanted to say that DEI work on the municipal level needs to be infused into everything we do. That's why it has to be such a conscious effort right now, because it has been absent. So it has to become almost second nature, while being very conscious, of course. But I think the committees, the efforts that are happening now are about teaching people to use new muscles, and that it will become a matter of course to be looking at our policies and our proposals and our ordinances and our practices through this lens always.
We have Nat Kinney. Not sure where Nat's from. Nat, could you tell us?
Hey, I'm from Johnson. Thank you for this, for hosting this. I think DEI is important for the community because there are people in our community who are telling us that they feel vulnerable to harassment, and that they feel unsafe in a lot of situations. And whenever someone, as a community leader, whenever somebody in the community says that they're feeling unsafe, I think it's really incumbent on us to really try and learn it and understand more and try and help correct that.
One of the things that I like to add to, as you all are answering this question before we move to the second one, and you can certainly still continue to answer the first one, is as I'm listening, I hear people, I did hear BIPOC, love to, if you feel comfortable as you talk and you're referencing your community, is it, is there a way of, is there a particular group of folks, everyone, we're talking about everyone, but different communities have different situations and issues, and love to be able to hear, to identify if there's a particular focus or area around different populations and who you're referencing in some of your answers. Ted, you can continue, but I wanted to add that in.
So let's move on to the second question. As Wanda said, you can certainly continue to answer the first question as to why DEI is important, but we're going to move on to the second question for those who want to answer the second question. What does your municipality need in order to advance DEI? What does your municipality need in order to advance DEI?
I love that Putney is so active. Jamie Contois is up again.
All right.
My apologies for speaking twice, but I have a list an arm length long that I've been waiting for this moment for 2 years. You are my people. We are a small town, about 2,500 folks. And so I saw that budget number, the $32,000 expenditure over 3 years for support and consulting. And that's not realistic, I don't think, for small towns. So one thing would be identifying grants so we can bring in trainers and support for internal assessment. The other is we've been looking at, one of the first things our committee did was a review of our town personnel policy, something that I didn't have experience with, and our commitment to equity work and in looking at policies through an equity lens was something that I was really curious about. As a queer woman, it really struck me, I think, about town forms and the forms I've had to fill out over the years, and how I've had to deny my identity on a town form or a government form, which causes harm. I remember filing federal income taxes and having to say I was single when I was in fact married, as an example of how you interface with government forms. So I think those are some of the very concrete policy analysis, a form analysis, support for fundraising for development and training are just a couple of the low-hanging fruit.
Right. Thank you so much. That was very helpful. Anyone else?
Yeah, Deborah Wright from, I believe, Rockingham or Bellows Falls. Deborah, help me remember.
The town's Rockingham, and I'm a Bellows Falls village president. So yeah, so it's kind of some of both, right? So my reason for speaking on the second question is I think back to the first question just briefly, I think our community inside within the municipality itself, both town and village, would say they probably didn't have a problem. That's what I feel based upon all the things that have happened since I started in municipal government. However, for the second question, and I believe we need it, in particular, I just finished a mediation where it was clear we could have used something and nothing was proposed, and I'm planning to propose it at our next trustee meeting, although the town might want to do it too, is we need assistance from VLCT in moving forward, how to advance DEI in trainings. I think all departments need that. And as we do it and it becomes presented to the public and we wind up talking about it in an open meeting, it will bring more information to the table about how things really are, as opposed to how we may perceive them under the veil of the municipality. And I think that that's one of the things that, of course, the committee is working on. I think that's an extremely important step. And then, of course, funding and funding sources, as was previously spoken of from Putney, in order to make sure that we can get this in a target date. Say we pick 6 to 12 months or whatever, whenever the material is available, and can move it forward, knowing that every department wouldn't be able to do it immediately. But I think that that will filter itself into the community as well as what happens in the municipality. But I think it's really important that we have that training. No matter what the numbers are in our community for people of color, and other areas, and sexual orientation and religious orientation, and whether you're male or female or how you identify, all of that is stuff that we have not addressed, although it continues to come up in different forums throughout government throughout the years that I've been here. And I think it's important that we have some structure that we can fall back to get training and open our minds and wake up Rockingham. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Deborah. Anyone else?
Yeah.
I believe we had Rick Taft there for a moment. Rick, did you have something else?
Deborah kind of touched on it. I think one of the biggest things is, the folks that are here, I know we have a diversity and equity committee. We're dealing with, as Cameron put it from Montpelier, we're dealing with years of people thinking we're doing everything right. And somehow we need to get that culture to change. And it's going to be through education, through training, as Deborah said, but it's also years and years of bias and not even realizing that there is a bias. I'm dealing with it in a school situation, and they're changing rapidly. Kind of concerning, they're changing so rapidly, but it's a good thing. And I think, all the people here, including VLCT, are very aware that this needs to happen, that we need the diversity in the workforce. But at the same time, we need to get the training down to the people who are going to be interacting on a daily basis, because I think that's where a lot of the issues are going to arise. They're not going to arise at the committee level or the council level or even the management level. They're going to arise in the day-to-day operations. And I think it's going to be critical that as a municipality, we have the ability to get the training and the education that we need for our staff so that we can continue to move this forward.
Thank you, Rick. I just want to add there, I hear what you're saying, but I also want to make sure that it's clear that it's very important that that leadership also be engaged in that training. Very often when it relates to DEI, everyone's looking at leadership to see what they're doing. So it's really important that leadership also be engaged in that training. And I agree with you, staff needs training as well, but I didn't want us to move on to the next question without pointing that out. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak on that?
Nikki, you have Jolene Mulvaney and then Ellen Kay.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, Barry City. A few things. One is useful data that we can use to examine whether a project, actually use the Vermont State Equity Impact Assessment Tool to discover whether or not, some project that they're planning is inequitable. But in order to use that, we need data that's broken out in certain ways that is either very difficult to find now. Different agencies collect different kinds of data. There should be some kind of ombudsperson or some kind of nexus where that data can be accessible to communities if it's out there. And if it's not out there, some kind of help in collecting that data, some way that we can collect it from our communities. The other thing is we should definitely bring training into our communities for staff and for leadership like the mayors and the select people. But I think it's also important to include community. A community-wide education is really important because not only do we need to educate or maybe train, if you will, the leadership and the people who interact with the community, it's really important for the community to be brought along too, at the very least to understand what the municipality is going through.
Okay, thank you so much, Jolene. Is there, there was one other person, I believe?
Yep, you have Ellen Kay, and then you also have Al Vojay.
Okay.
With me, and I'll just piggyback on Joellen. We work on the committee together in Barrie. And so I just wanted to add, in order for this to be really meaningful, especially if you're a city appointed committee, and we need budgets. We need a real concrete commitment from the cities that we work in, or else our work is fairly meaningless. And we need to be able to put forward proposals and have them actually move. So that's one thing. Otherwise, it's lip service, and that's very destructive and dangerous, actually. The other thing I think would be really an easy thing to do is for a VLCT to facilitate, or someone to facilitate, towns coming together in regular information sharing sessions, checking in about what concrete actions we're taking, what difficulties we've come up against, sharing resources, not inventing the wheel independently, each town 251 times.
Okay, great.
Ted, after Al. Thank you. Ted, after Al goes, we'll move to the next set of questions. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Al. I live in St. Albans, Vermont, and Regional Planning Commissioner for Franklin County and Grand Isle County. I'm also on the Museum of St. Albans Museum Board, and was a comment made about community awareness, community education. And so may I suggest that we think about using museums as a somewhat of a neutral but also educational community forum. Our museum has been trying to get more information about our history and the people who've lived in here from the BIPOC community. Interestingly, we're in the Abenaki region. We have very little information, very more recent stuff that people, Abenakis have shared with us, but no long-range history of where they were, how long they've been here before us, how they lived, etc. And we have no, to my knowledge, other than the tribe itself, we don't have any leadership in multiple municipalities. They should be invited and brought into our picture, an understanding of what happened to them over the millennia. We have the same problem with BIPOC communities. Very little understanding. Our museum has been trying to put up some boards to give some information, but we have can find very little information. So I, having lived in Dachau, near Dachau and Germany, and worked in the concentration camp way after the war, 18 years after the war, bring back the need for us to understand, white people in particular, understand our humanity. Somehow we have lost that over the last 400 years since 1619. And we have to better understand, basically through critical race theory, what has happened, what to us and to members of the Black community over the several centuries. So I guess I would suggest that we think beyond municipalities and look at our municipal and regional museums to be partners.
Okay, thank you, Al, very much. All right, Ted, next slide, and I hand it over to you, Wanda.
Okay, thank you. So in what ways can VLCT be a resource to you as it relates to DE&I? And some of you have already started that answering that question, but invite more responses for elaborations. Thank you.
We have Anne. Is it Gollum? I apologize, Anne.
Yes, that's correct. So I'm in the town of New Thing, and we've had some very, I guess best description would be some very heated discussions about this whole issue. It's been pretty painful in the degree to which our town has really divided. And the select board recommended that anyone who is interested in taking the training class that VLCT offered in July to please do so. And that was a great idea because it was free. And so there was tremendous opposition in the town to spending money on this. We're a very small town. There was tremendous opposition to spending any money. There was tremendous opposition from some people to even offer the class. But we were able to do it because it was free and it was through VLCT. Unfortunately, the class did not really answer what we were hoping it would do for our community. And I would beg, request VLCT to look for creating a new course that could be made available that would really be widely available to the town members as an introduction to beginning to think about this issue and to get more people involved in taking the training. For us, that would be invaluable. Thank you.
And may I ask a clarifying or
Sure.
some more clarity? What was the goal or the hope of the outcome of the training? DE&I or DE&IB belongingness is where we're hoping to get to. What was the goal of the training that you think that didn't hit? Because that's a variety. There's so many ways of providing training. So I'm just wanting to get some clarity.
I experienced the training as too related to putting out ideas of what one could do without really taking people through understanding. I would say some more what I think of as sort of an introductory level of what is the history of diversity, lack of diversity, racism in our country, and being able to take people through more of a understanding of how this has been baked into the history of our country. And so it therefore makes it imperative for everyone to participate in thinking about these issues.
Thank you. Thank you. That's helpful.
Great. I do see Al's hand. I just want to give a chance for others who have not spoken to speak before we go back to Al. So are there any other hands? Anybody else would like to answer this question? I see Walter Martone.
Hi, Walter Martone from Springfield. I'm the chair of the select board. Our town just recently survived an onslaught from regional and national groups regarding CRT in our schools. One of the school board members brought forth a resolution which had its origin in Colorado Springs. And fortunately, we already had a group that was looking into issues of equity ever since the Black Lives Matter thing started happening. What I'm getting at here is with where VLCT can be helpful to us is that we were fortunate enough that a lot of our members just jumped in. The group mushroomed to about 50 people, and people started contacting the state, contacting the Secretary of Education, the governor's office, our legislators, to get people to rally and mount some kind of an opposition to this whole effort to try and ban CRT in our schools, where people didn't even understand what CRT meant and what they were trying to ban. I think that when things like this happen, we need a statewide organization like VLCT who can marshal those forces and can, almost be like a strike force to bring in help from wherever we need it to go against something like that. It happens very quickly, and it happens without a lot of advance notice, and you have to be ready to respond. And the response just can't come from your community. You need to bring in outside resources, because these other groups that are coming to promote these things are bringing in outside resources. I mean, they're bringing in speakers, they're organizing rallies and things like that. So that's something that I think that VLCT could really be of help with.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
So I think before we go to, no offense, Al, just offering another chance for the silent folks out there. Al,
Okay.
But Al, you can go ahead and.
Thank you. First of all, I agree wholeheartedly with both Ann and Walter. I'm a little bit more technical. In St. Albans Town now, we're reviewing our various rules and regulations. So I would suggest that possibly VLCT could beef up their legal department to review what our planning commissions before they get to the select board suggest in terms of changing of our bylaws. I don't want you guys to do the hard work. I want our local committee to do the hard work, but then to use you as a resource, your legal department, to say, how St. Albans Town have you thought about? That's my only additional point.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to throw and bring in question 4 as well now to this discussion. How does your municipality foster a welcoming and inclusive workplace and community, or does it not? And remember, these questions could sound the same or based upon people who are answering them, but they are different. And so I open that question out, or put that question out to everyone.
I don't see any hands.
Does that mean it isn't happening at all?
I do see Deborah's hand, but I'm just going to give folks a chance from who haven't spoken to speak. We'd love to hear from especially smaller towns and those that haven't spoken. There's actually quite a nice crowd on this call, so I'm hoping you can engage.
Is there something good that's happening that folks would like to share that other people can hear about what you're doing in this area?
While we wait, we have Deborah Wright again. Deborah.
Well, I don't want to get in anyone else's way who hasn't spoken. But I would respond in that the municipality, both town and village, are rather, I would say, mostly neutral concerning a welcoming environment, a workplace. Also, but I'd like to say that, but the reality is after the mediation I had spoken about before completed, it became very clear that even just with male to female, there's problems there. Representation of both sexes is not equal. Representation through either participation in the municipality, elected officials, that sort of thing. And even inside of the individual departments. It's clear it's unequal and needs work. So again, I'd like to say they're neutral about it on the surface, but not underneath. It's unequal. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Well, you know, that idea about, neutrality and even Kendi is talking about it. We're not really neutral. We're making a decision on our silence or our lack of doing something. So we're really truly are making a statement one way or another. So thank you, Deborah, for that. I really appreciate that.
I don't see any other hands up right now. We got one from Ann Lawless from Wheelock.
Thank you, Ted. My town is really small. It's around 800 people. And on the plus side, I would say that, I just want to say that gender, at least sort of a very simple way of looking at gender doesn't seem to be a problem because we have 2 women on our 3-person select board. But I think that our municipality, in our municipal leadership, there isn't really a perception that welcoming people to our community is the town government's narrowly conceived job. I think people don't expect that to be our job. That's, our job is to deal with the roads. Our job is to take care of our public buildings and, insurance for our employees, things that are sort of like old school, very narrow. And the challenge is to broaden that scope. Thank you.
I see is it Al Wakefield? Are you seeing that, Ted?
Nope, if you saw Al, please, yeah, recognize him. I didn't see him raise his hand, but go for it, Al, if you have something.
Sure, I'm just thinking about the Declaration of Inclusion that we talked about earlier, and we had an interesting situation in the town of Rutland over the last couple of months or so, in which the town initially came to a vote and voted against a Declaration of Inclusion. And one of the town board members, to your point, Ann Lawless, said the responsibilities of the select board are to deal with roads, grounds, bridges, and the budget. And so that's kind of that may be pervasive across a number of select boards. I think as select boards become younger, as occurred here in Rutland City, where they took the lead, in fact, in adopting a Declaration of Inclusion, is that the responsibilities go beyond just roads and grounds. That's an educational process which will and hopefully occur over a period of time. But it's going to take some surgical procedures and some instances brain lobotomy procedures to get that, to make that change. But they voted just last week once again to adopt, the same town, that is town of Rutland, to adopt a Declaration of Inclusion. And interestingly, they voted because one of the town select board members on Facebook stated some very kind of racist kind of stuff. And on that basis, the remaining members of the select board said, this really is indicative of how this select board feels and maybe a portion of the town, and we ought to take that up. And so they did, in a more open kind of discussion, the community getting involved at that meeting, and in fact approved a Declaration of Inclusion. So I just wanted to say that to your point, Ann. The role of select boards may be changing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Al. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
It really speaks to the creation of the who's in the pipeline coming up to serve in these communities in certain ways as well. I know there's another hand up. I also want to make sure we're moving on to the next set of questions as Ellen is coming up. I think it's Ellen who I see, but so after this, maybe Ted, the next slide or the next question.
Okay, go for it, Ellen.
Well, I'll say in Berry City, it has been a very uphill battle to get the select board, at least the earlier select board last year, to recognize that this is town business. In fact, our committee was asked to craft a proposal, you probably all know about this, but maybe not in any detail, which I won't go into, about flags, about the Black Lives Matter flag specifically, and what ensued should be studied. And in fact, we brought forth this proposal, it was approved, and then immediately a select board member took it to town meeting for a vote to nullify it. So there is a very strong feeling in our town, and maybe it's a tiny minority, but very vocal, that this stuff doesn't belong at this level at all. And a real confusion with talking about structural racism versus a personal attack on people for their racist ideas. not versus, but that's conflated and they use it to not talk about structural racism. So it's hard.
Great, Wanda, I'd love to just bring a chat statement. It's a question, but I think this is a good one to end this on, and it relates to it, which was from Rob Gayati from Dorset, who just asked, how can we protect DEI efforts from becoming politicized in our community? Because Vermont towns are non-political places where boards don't run as part of parties. And I just wanted to add that. I think it's a similar sentiment. Thanks, Rob. I'll take you to the next slide.
Well, before we move on to the next slide, I wanted to sort of throw out this question to folks. A number of people have said that their municipalities don't feel that this is something that they're supposed to deal with. They only deal with the nuts and bolts of day-to-day, the streets, the insurance and so forth. My question is there anyone who has any thoughts about whether that's genuine? Is that a genuine concern that that's not what they do, or is that an excuse not to do it? Has anybody seen that or had any experiences with that in their municipality? No? Has anyone challenged that particular perspective that it's not their job?
You're on mute, Ted.
You have two. You have Joellen Mulvaney and Jamie Contois from Putney again. So Joellen.
Okay.
We have a city council member, a sitting city council member who denies that there's racism in the community. He thinks that it's just a few incidents that people can point to and that it's really not a problem, nor is it an issue that the council should deal with. However, those council members that say that take up an awful lot of time discussing it. I cannot tell you how many months it was that the Black Lives Matter issue was kicked around. So I think it's not that they actually don't believe that it's there. It's that they really have difficulty discussing it in a way that can bring anything to resolution. It's really more about some kind of complaint and fear.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that fear piece.
Right.
And you have Jamie.
I've thought about this a lot because I come from a family that has lots of political affiliations. And I watch Governor Scott, a Republican, and some of the work that's happening on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the state. And I really see that there is somehow a partisan nature of the conversations around DEI.
Mm-hmm.
I was told when raising the desire to do an equity committee in our community that town government is no place for progressive politics. And so I think the challenge I'm hearing from many people around the state is a belief that fundamental human rights are somehow a partisan issue, and that I see the capacity within Vermont for people to recognize the falseness of that narrative. And the reality is human rights are human issues, and we intersect in many different political ways. So I think the work of VLCT, I can't say that, VLCT, to normalize these conversations within a nonpartisan context, as these are fundamental questions of welcoming, safety, health, and vitality in our communities, is the framework that we will succeed in, because they aren't partisan. And they have been created into partisan fights, has been reflected all over the state in our conversations today. So continuing to ground it in the humanness of each other and our diverse political experiences is really critical for VLCT.
Thank you so much. That was very thoughtful. Thank you.
We have Bill Shepeluk who'd like to say something from the town of Waterbury.
Yes, Ted, can I ask you though to go ahead and advance the slide? I'm watching a little bit of the time too, like, as people sort of think about the next set of questions that are coming up. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. Yeah, this is a very, very challenging issue, and I think, like all of us, I'm learning and taking incremental baby steps, trying to move forward here. And to the question that was asked, I think Wanda asked it. Does anybody really think that the nuts and bolts are the job here, and this issue isn't? I have to admit, I'm guilty of saying that. Several months ago, we've had a couple of divisive, very hot select board meetings, which are challenging enough. And then when they're on Zoom and there's all kinds of people from all over the place that are just kind of chiming in, it's been very difficult to manage. But I am guilty of saying that, I had two people visit me here at my office and to try for me to learn about what their concerns were. And, I turned around and I looked out the window behind me and said, well, my job has always been to make sure that the roads are in good condition, that the recreation fields and recreation programs are good and available for anyone who wants to use them. And I'm not sure how this is really an issue that I can do anything about, and really should it be part of my job? And I certainly did not, I don't think I said that in a manner that was off-putting or telegraphing that I'm racist. I mean, I admitted in the conversation that I think structural racism is clearly something that we have to deal with. And one of the people that was chatting with me said, well, unless you admit that white supremacy is a problem and that you're part of that issue, then you're part of the problem, and we've got to move forward. And that was a hard thing to hear. I was angry with it at first, but I've thought about it a lot since then, and I don't know how to take the next step. Our select board has had 2 training sessions so far with a woman by the name of Mary Gannon. I think many of you know who Mary is. We start off well, and we always get lost in the weeds because it always seems to come back to some issue that's happening here in our community, and we never can get to hear about the structural issues because all of the, it's like the tyranny of the urgent. All these little brush fires get in the way of us actually really learning something that might be able to help us. And last night, we had someone show up. They asked to fly the Black Lives Matter flag on the municipal banner poles, which we did a year ago. And, it unfortunately just devolved. It was an hour-long, really difficult, divisive conversation. People telling us that Black Lives Matter is not a political statement. It's just, it's not speech. It's just what we should do. And then we had other members of the public who were reading from the Black Lives Matter website, reading about how they were proud of their actions during the 2020 election and then the 2021 election in Georgia. And if they're putting themselves out there as a partisan group, how is this not political speech? So we've got a long way to go here. And I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you for listening. I'm hoping that none of you think that I'm, part of the problem. I really don't want to be part of the problem, but figuring out how we can even have these conversations in our communities right now is really tough on sitting in the seats that I sit in. And the point I was going to try to make, and I'm sorry for taking up so much time, is that, all of us, even the biggest communities of ours are small communities. We rely on volunteer people to be on our select boards and city councils. We've got a lot of stuff to do. We've got budgets to do. And these things just end up taking an inordinate amount of time, and we don't seem to make any progress at all in it. And I think that's where people like me say, my job is to make sure that the roads and the bridges and the fire department and the rec programs are ready to go for everyone. And we just don't have the time to do what we seem to need to do because we can't even define what the problems are or if there's a problem. And it's very, very frustrating. And it's, this is an issue that it's the first time ever in my career that I've ever wondered if this is really for me, if this job is really for me. Not because I don't want to do it, but I can't seem to do other things that I need to do and deal with this at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you
So much.
Thank you for being so vulnerable, Bill.
Yeah, really appreciate it. The things that are coming to mind is my own day-to-day work. What I would say is one of the things that I think that is important here or to acknowledge, first of all, we're all dealing with the echoes of our history and our past, and also we're creating some contemporary issues and so forth. And so it is very challenging and very difficult in terms of getting a grip on that, what to do, as well as our own education and so forth. But one of the things that I really feel that, I know higher education misses the boat, but I also know that nonprofits miss the boat on these things. You have to be strategic about doing this work. And oftentimes things happen and people are just all over the place. And people enter into the space and wanting to do the work at very different stages and places and haven't done anything. I was listening to someone who spoke earlier and I was thinking about, I think it was Ann, and I said, tell me more about the training. And I felt like what I was hearing was there was no analysis done to help people understand. And when I say that, I'm not saying that you have to be all up here in your head, but I do think that there's an expectation in your head and your heart. And if we were talking about the budget or other things, we really, we try to be strategic. We understand where we try and get better where we started at and where we're going. And I often say in my work at the in higher education, I said it at UVM and I'm saying it at CMU, every effort that we put in to make sure we were prepared around COVID-19 in terms of our faculty, staff, and students, and all the resources, all the planning, if we took that same mindset around DEI, where would we be? And really trying to put that in a way that they can understand that we're not going to solve everything, but what is the problem at hand for our institution? So I find that a lot of this is about what are the core values, what are the mission, and what are the things that you will tackle and take on within phases, because you can't do everything. And also you got to have a lot of knowledge about these kind of things. And the last thing I wanted to say, as I heard people talking too, my work in this area is about today and not just tomorrow. Given who I am, my age, my children, and all those kinds of things, I want to have some of those experiences in terms of the services that are being provided, the experiences that I'm having. I want those right now. I'm not working just for tomorrow. And so one of the things I'm thinking about as people come in and interact, whether it's forms and policies or procedures or any of those kind of things, we have to think about that. And all of what you all are putting into this conversation is important. And I did want to highlight, again, as Nikki said, thank you, Bill, for sharing, because that's the real stuff, and the real stuff get us to the next leg. So having said that, I know there are hands, and keep your questions there because Ted's going to call on you, but I'd like to be able to, because of time, lift up the other two questions that are here as people are answering now. How does your municipality deliver inclusive service or does not? Again, you may feel like that may have been put out there, but we haven't heard from a lot of people. And then what are the challenges that will keep your municipality from advancing its D&I goals and objectives? And I think we're touching upon some of that, but I want to lift those two questions into the space at this time as well. Thank you.
So why don't we go to Al Wakefield, and then I'm going to ask for those who haven't spoken to please come forward and help us out here. You create this program, you create where VLCT goes to try to create these tools. So we're really looking for your input. Al.
Yeah, just two things. One is I remember when we made the presentation to my little town here of 800 people, the select board, when we finished after 10 or 15 minutes, just sat and looked. And what felt like hours. And the conclusion I came to after subsequently getting to know more members of the select board that I'm more closely working with right now is that, yeah, they just didn't know that this was the kind of thing that should come before them. It was unfamiliar to them. And so their response was really just kind of almost nothing. I realized subsequently that it's just a whole new area of their involvement. And I thought it was interesting because in another town committee that I'm involved, we're talking about the economic aspects of this community and what we need to do to bring more businesses here and what we need to do to sustain the businesses that are already here. And they didn't see the tie-in, in my judgment, between welcoming on one hand or not welcoming and the economic aspects of having people come in who bring businesses, bring resources, bring talent, etc. That's in the face of all these we need people, kind of signs around town. And to that point, the whole economic aspect of it is where kind of the rubber meets the ground or meets the road or whatever, however that saying goes, where people understand that it's not just the moral aspects of it. There's a significant economic aspect to this whole thing of diversity, bringing businesses to town, keeping businesses here, bringing talent to people those businesses that are already here. Curtis Reed, who many of you know, wrote, I thought, a brilliant article a few weeks ago, published in Vermont Digger, about the economic aspects of diversity. And I'd urge it, Ted, if you can put that on the website at some point or here at this meeting, I think that'll help move this discussion on forward, because that's where people really relate to the dollar aspects of this. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Al.
I think we have Evan from Essex.
Thanks, everybody. I was listening to all this, and I think one of the things for your number 5 is it's that we're mired in being equitable and not necessarily inclusive. We try to provide services for everybody, homogenous, versus being intentional about trying to be inclusive. It's just what I was thinking.
Thank you, Evan.
Thank you. Thank you. It is interesting. A lot of people don't actually even know the difference between D, E, and I, and use them very much interchangeably. Too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We think we do a great job of plowing streets, which we probably do. But do we do any programming for the people of our community to get them out and get them engaged? So.
We don't have any other hands raised. Just like to remind people they can enter things in the chat. Some people have done that, and I can read those out. We're going to open the chat, I think, here now, so everyone can see what's posted, right?
Yes. Can you go to the next slide first?
Yeah. I was going to say we should go to the next slide.
So there are 2 questions here. There is the question number 8 as, so number 7, does your municipality have a set of D&I goals and objectives? If so, share one. If not, why not? Again, this is an opportunity, if you do have something, to share with your peers and your colleagues here. But Nikki and I also wanted to make sure that in these last 15 minutes and opening up the chat, as well as you can raise your hand still, what hasn't been said that you want to make sure gets out there around D&I in relationship to municipalities or VLCT. And so this is kind of an open question. And remember, you can also go back to something else that we've asked, but Nikki, would you add anything to that as Ted is opening it up?
No, just, we want to hear anything that you haven't said. Is really important that we put these things out here because in the end, it'll help VLCT better serve you.
For those that may be wondering why it's silent, it's intentional silence, waiting for you to answer the questions or share your thoughts.
Let's go strong in this last 15 minutes. We can do this.
I see Elaine Wong.
I just wanted to encourage people to speak up. I found Bill's testimony there extremely helpful. So even if you feel like you're not getting anywhere, sometimes that's how I feel in my town. That perspective is very helpful, how you think about this work and how challenging it might be.
Thanks, Elaine.
And we have Alana Blanchard from the city of South Burlington.
Unmuting helps. Hi, everyone. So I just, I think it's hard because we haven't been doing it or acknowledging it, but also it's just extremely emotional. And I know, working in cities for a long time, sidewalks are extremely emotional, and so are speed bumps. And, now I'm very hesitant, and I'm like, with the community, are you really sure you want to talk about this? And I think this is like that, exponentially more difficult. And I know anyone who reads the paper, I think when we watch the school go through it, we're like, oh, okay, glad that's happening over in the school district. But it does point out that these are huge issues for our community. And I grew up in Vermont, so I know definitely for the state. I don't think you have to grow up here to know that.
Right.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because there is definitely also that part of full awareness that there are lots of people in these spaces, and to make oneself vulnerable or to share some of their thinking can be very difficult, or worried about any kind of repercussions and those kinds of things, and those are real things. And so please share what you feel comfortable sharing, and also opportunities for us to think about, or VLCT to think about, again, how they might collect information as well in a confidential or anonymous way as well. Just want to add that. So thank you all.
One other hand there, before we go back to Ellen, just want to make sure we're hearing from others. A quick fact for everybody, the UVM Center for Research in Vermont did a study focused on the demographics of select board members and town officials. The publication is available on the UVM Center for Research on Vermont. It asked the question at VLCT's request, whether or not participants in that survey had done any equity work with their select board. Of the, I think, 150 or so that answered the question, less than 70 said they had done any equity work. And that included a conversation about equity at the select board level, a conversation about, Black Lives Matter flags, establishing an equity committee. So I know, and you can also see that study also has a lot of comments on there talking about why they haven't done that. I'm not going to rehash them here. Those aren't I statements. So I simply want to bring people's attention to that. And I see that we have Amy Howlett with a statement.
So thank you. I'm in Saxons River, which is part of the larger town of Rockingham, and this has been a morning of illumination. I'm a relatively new trustee, and we have not dealt with these questions at all. So I love that this discussion is in some ways grounded in economic development, which is very familiar terrain for us. That's very helpful. I also noticed that nonprofits in our area have been quicker to jump on these issues, although not without hesitation. So the municipal library, for example, has for several years been doing inclusive book discussions and dealing with difficult situations through novels. And really, I think making some headway. So it's just to say thank you, and you've given me a great deal to think about. I think I'll go slowly, given the kinds of feedback. I don't think I'm particularly trusted in this village yet as a purveyor of new ideas. But I really appreciate a whole day of thinking about this topic. Thanks.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you.
Ellen Kay, then John Bartlett.
I just want to talk about training for a minute. What kind of training we do matters a lot. The National League of Cities has excellent trainings that the VLCT committee was able to go to, and others in the state, and it grounded all of this in a discussion of history and structural racism, and made a real distinction between interpersonal issues about racism and structural racism, and really seemed to open a door as to how municipalities could actually approach this. And I just think that we have to be really, maybe VLCT can be a really good clearinghouse for the kinds of trainings. No reason that we should be wasting our money and our time on the wrong kind of trainings that are just going to lead us into a rabbit hole of fighting, as opposed to saying, hey, we have this amazing opportunity now to make a change that's going to be so deep and meaningful and way overdue. How do we do this together?
Thank you.
John.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to add here at the end, I would say that one of the things we found in Milton and other communities might be finding it's such a broad topic. Everybody comes into it with their own background and age or level of knowledge, and there's always so much to learn. And I think one of the things we've learned in Milton too is that it's that it's a broad audience, and that there's a lot of different facets to what can be done to support it and also recognize community members' wishes. And two of the things we've done, we do have a police advisory committee that there's a portion of it, really ties into this discussion that's been formed and is working hard with some residents on that and a bunch of things to address, as well as we did erect a community flag that came up with a policy to allow groups that wish to display their flag on that flag pole, a very broad acceptance and understanding of what could go up there. And so those are sort of tangents to what we're talking about, but I think they all tie into the topic of how you can address various residents' concerns, and as well as those people that pass through your town.
Don't have any other hands up. I don't see anything else in the chat asking for people to speak. So I take that back.
I'm sorry, what?
I take that back. Yeah, we have Tracy, is it Delphia from Essex?
Delphia, yes. Throughout Black Lives Matter flag conversations in the Essex Westford School District, recently I've heard a lot of, it's a divisive issue. It's a divisive issue. And I just sort of wanted to point out that change does not come from being comfortable. Change comes from putting yourself in uncomfortable situations, unfamiliar situations, and learning things that you have not been subject to before, opening yourself up to new experiences. So, whenever I hear that something is divisive, I immediately go to, well, if there was an issue with sewer capacity in our town, would we say, oh no, that's too divisive, we can't talk about it? No, we wouldn't, because it needs to happen, because it's important, because we've made it a priority. So I just wanted to share that thought that I've been having recently. And I apologize for my dog barking.
Thank you.
Well, the last closing minutes, is there any other questions? what I wanted to, I personally wanted to remind folks, especially those of you who are engaged in government, and I've been a public servant, most of my career. It's really important to keep in mind, regardless of how divisive we think the conversation is, that there are people who are counting on you to make them feel welcomed, make them include them, and they don't get to decide that we're not going to talk about this because they live it every day. And it's really important to keep that in mind, that there are people like myself, like Wanda, who we live these experiences every day. We worry about our children, we worry about our neighbors, we worry about, safety or, what's coming next. I mean, when you look at what's happening in our country where laws are being passed specifically to impede Black people from voting, when you look at what's happening in the country around critical race theory, those are scary things to us because we know the history. We know that those are steps towards the ugliness that we saw of Jim Crow laws and so forth. And often I think we sit, especially in Vermont, and say, oh, we're not those kind of people. I don't want to wake up and find out we are. And so I think ultimately each person needs to take the time and think about the neighbor, the friend who's different, and how you can impact their lives, not just how you feel, because I know the fear is there, but you're talking about other human beings, and we have to get past that fear when we're talking about other human beings. That's it for me. Wanda?
I think I just want to thank everyone for taking the time and sharing. So appreciate it. And I learn something all the time, every day. And so this will help me with my thinking, but I hope that it helps each and every one of you ponder some of this stuff and think about where you want to go. But just to remember, we continue to have a growing domain of what we mean by diversity. It's not going anywhere. There's the multiple voices and intersectionality. And so there will be more. So let's, I like to think, like everybody else that'll roll with me, is, let's get into some good trouble, because I don't know if there's any other answer but for us to get into some good trouble. But let's get smart about that good trouble, and prepare our minds as well as our bodies for what we're doing every day. So I thank you, and I turn it back to Ted for the last word. I do see a couple hands, so Ted, I'll let you monitor that or whatever you want to do.
I think we've reached the end of our time, unless you folks have more. I think we took Wanda and Nikki past our anticipated stop time. So I want to thank everybody for coming out. I want to remind folks that we have another session focusing on equity, a different bent. I want to be clear, it's going to feel very different than this morning's two sessions. At 1 o'clock, we have a nationally recognized law enforcement expert who's going to come and really challenge us in some of this equity issue. Not that it doesn't matter, not that it's not a problem, but that some of the ways we're going about addressing equity in policing are not evidence-based. And so come learn about it. It's another perspective. I think it'll be real challenging and interesting, but again, themed to what we're talking about today, that we all have a role. I also want to point out this morning, I flagged that there's a gamification opportunity. And if you look to the left-hand side of your Feed Loop app, you can go to gamification, enter the code EQUITY, EQUITY. I think I spelled it right, all caps, and that'll get you points for today's session. Again, thank you to Wanda and Elaine. If you didn't feel comfortable speaking up today, please send me an email, tbrady@vlct.org. Again, that's tbrady@vlct.org. And we'll be sure to incorporate that into kind of the goal of this session was to get your feedback to inform our plan on how to provide services to you, our members. Thanks again, everyone. We look forward to seeing you at 1 o'clock, and you can join again at 3 o'clock to have more conversation about equity. Again, a much more free-flowing conversation, just to debrief on how today was and get your input. Have a great day.
All right. Take care, everyone.